The grand chamber of the Intergalactic Council buzzed with unease, the murmurs of 1,000 alien dignitaries filling the vast, high-vaulted room. Towering holographic banners flickered with the emblems of great empires, their leaders seated in gilded thrones, encased in hovering pods, or standing in exoskeletal battle armor. But among them, one seat remained vacant, its nameplate coated in a fine layer of dust, Earth. A relic of a species that had never spoken, never bargained, never once acknowledged the galaxy's existence. For 1,000 years, the seat had been there. And for 1,000 years, it had remained untouched. The silence surrounding it was deafening. Commander Dane Korath, a towering warlord of the Skora Dominion, leaned back in his seat, fingers drumming against the steel armrest of his chair. His eyes, black pools reflecting the council's dim lights, narrowed as he listened to the terrified whispers of lesser species. They spoke of ships that had never returned, of fleets swallowed whole, of a presence within Sol's dark heart that defied comprehension. Fear, that was what he heard. The mighty races of the galaxy, the conquerors and slavers, the devourers of planets, afraid of an empty chair. He exhaled sharply, amused. Pathetic. Grand Chancellor Vorex, a serpentine being draped in ceremonial robes, slammed a clawed hand against the central podium, demanding order. The matter cannot be ignored any longer. Too many expeditions have vanished without trace. The latest fleet, the Xyrix Armada, numbered over 300 warships. Not a single vessel returned. His reptilian eyes flickered toward the empty seat. Yet the Terrans, if they even exist, remain silent. The chamber descended into hushed conversation. No one wanted to be the one to ask the obvious question. Finally, an avian representative from the Karvan Dominion spoke, his feathers trembling. We must assume hostile intent. Laughter, low and rumbling, rolling like thunder across the chamber. Korath leaned forward, his heavy gauntlets tapping against the polished metal of his armrest. Hostile intent, he echoed, his voice like a blade against stone. They've said nothing in 1,000 years. We have laid waste to entire civilizations, burned moons, shattered fleets, yet Earth remains watching, silent. He sneered, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. And you assume they are the aggressors. More whispers, uneasy glances. Even the Karvan representative looked away. Korath bared his fangs in a grin. Cowards. Vorex's gaze settled on Korath, unreadable. Then perhaps, Commander, you are the one to uncover the truth. The murmurs stopped. Silence fell across the chamber like a funeral shroud. Korath felt the weight of 100 alien eyes locking onto him. He knew what this was, a test. The council was terrified, but they would never admit it. Instead, they would send a warlord, the greatest the Skora Dominion had produced, into the void to prove a point. And if he never returned, it would be his failure, not theirs. He grinned wider. He had conquered entire sectors, crushed rebellions, burned monarchies to cinders. And now they wanted him to fear a species that had never shown its face. Ridiculous. He rose, his crimson cape billowing behind him. Very well. I will go to Sol. And if the Terrans exist, I will drag them before this council myself. His words rang out, laced with challenge. But no one responded. No cheers. No applause. Just silence. Uneasy, expectant silence. A week later, the indomitable Korath's flagship emerged from the abyss of slipstream space at the edge of the Sol system. Before him, a dark sea of silence stretched endlessly. No transmissions. No sensor readings. Nothing. He had expected resistance. Orbital defenses. Some desperate human colony clinging to the remains of its homeworld. Instead, he found a graveyard. Derelict ships, alien and ancient, drifted through the void, their hulls cracked, their crews long since vanished. Some belonged to the lost fleets. Others were older, much older. The wreckage of civilizations that had tried to claim Sol before him. His officers stirred uncomfortably. Commander, one of them murmured, This isn't normal. Korath ignored the fear in the man's voice. Launch probes, he ordered, stepping closer to the viewing screen. Scan the system. I want to know what killed them. The officers obeyed, scrambling to their stations. A dozen unmanned probes shot into the void, vanishing into the endless black. Moments stretched into minutes. Nothing. No response. No data. Then, one by one, the probes disappeared. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Impossible, one officer whispered. There was no impact, no energy reading. It's like they were erased. Korath felt something then, something he had not felt in decades. Not since he had been a young warrior standing on the burning ruins of his first conquest, looking upon the destruction he had wrought with his own hands. Doubt. A chill settled over the bridge as the main screen flickered. For the first time since entering the Sol system, a transmission came through. No visuals. No voice. Just two words, written in a language ancient and forgotten to all but the historians of dead worlds. Yet Korath understood it instantly. You were warned. The ship's lights dimmed. Shadows flickered where they shouldn't exist. The void outside the viewing screen seemed to stretch, distort. Something shifted at the edge of Korath's vision. Not a ship, not a fleet. Something else. Something that did not belong to the physical universe. Korath did not believe in gods. He had killed too many so-called immortal beings to put faith in the divine. But as he stared into the abyss beyond the hull of the Indomitable, he felt, for the first time, as though he were being watched, and that whatever was watching him was deciding whether or not he should exist at all. Korath's jaw tightened as he stared at the words glowing on the screen. You were warned. The bridge remained deathly silent, the crew frozen, their minds struggling to comprehend the message. The warning was not a threat, not a plea, not a demand. It was a simple statement of fact. Something about that unsettled him more than any war he had ever waged. His species had conquered entire empires, reduced civilizations to ashes, and yet, in this moment, for the first time in his existence, he felt a deep, primal uncertainty. Establish a perimeter, he growled, pushing the feeling aside. Full sensor sweep. No more probes. We move in carefully. The officers hesitated before snapping into action, their hands flying over consoles, executing his orders. The Indomitable pressed forward, flanked by its escorts. The other warships remained close, weapons primed, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to annihilate a dozen planets. Yet the Sol system remained unnervingly still, an empty void swallowing their presence without so much as an echo. Korath knew the tension on the bridge was building to a breaking point. One of his officers whispered, "Sir, I don't like this." "I didn't ask for your feelings," Korath shot back, eyes never leaving the black abyss beyond the viewport. The ship shuddered, just once. A slight tremor, barely enough to notice. But Korath noticed, and he knew his crew did too. The whispers stopped. "Report," he ordered. The census officer's fingers trembled as he tapped his console. There's nothing, Commander. No impact, no energy discharge. It just happened." Another tremor, this one stronger. Lights flickered. Korath felt it now, deep in his bones, as if something vast and unseen was shifting just beyond his comprehension. He refused to flinch. "Tactical. Give me a full scan of this system. I want." The ship lurched, not from an explosion, not from an attack, but as if the very space around them had suddenly been altered. Gravity wrenched at them from an impossible angle. Klaxon screamed. Officers gripped their stations, shouting over one another. "We're being pulled." No source detected. "Something's rewriting the physics around us." Korath fought against the pull, bracing himself as his ship groaned under the strain of forces that should not exist. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sensation stopped. The lights stabilized. The ship settled. The view outside remained unchanged, black, starless, silent. The silence was worse than the chaos. A single officer spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, we've moved." Koratha's eyes narrowed. "What?" The officer swallowed hard. "We are no longer in our original position, but the engines never engaged. We didn't move. We were relocated." That sent a chill through the bridge. Korath clenched his fists, his mind racing. No known technology could move an entire ship without any detectable force. This wasn't hyperspace, wasn't slipstream, wasn't a wormhole. It was something else, something outside their understanding. Then the lights flickered again, and a voice echoed through the ship. Not over the comms, not through any transmission. It was inside the ship, inside the air itself. Deep, resonant, cold. "You do not belong here." Every breath in the room stopped. Koratha's own blood ran cold for a fraction of a second before he forced his body to stillness. The voice did not speak again. The bridge crew looked to him, their faces pale, waiting for his command. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Weapons online. All ships prepare to." The viewport changed. One moment, it displayed the cold emptiness of Sol. The next, it was Earth. A planet untouched, blue oceans glimmering beneath golden sunlight, continents unmarred by war or industry. No signs of battle, no fleets, no fortresses. Just a quiet, pristine world hanging in the void. And yet, every instinct Korath had screamed that this was no paradise, because as his warships hung in orbit, they began to disappear. One by one, without weapons fire, without warning, entire vessels winked out of existence. No explosions, no debris, nothing. The bridge erupted into chaos. "Sir, the fleet. They had just gone." No energy readings, no wreckage. Koratha's hands gripped the console as he watched his entire armada vanish. 50 ships reduced to silence in the span of seconds. The Indomitable remained, along with only one other vessel, a cruiser on the far edge of the formation. Every other warship, some of the most powerful in the galaxy, was simply erased. His mind went to war with itself. This was impossible. Impossible. No weapon, no force, no civilization could just erase a fleet without leaving a trace. And yet, it had happened. Right before his eyes. His breathing slowed. His instincts sharpened. He knew what this was now. A message. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't a war. It was a demonstration. He turned, locking eyes with his officers. He saw the fear in them. It was real, tangible, suffocating. And for once, he did not dismiss it, because for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never once allowed himself to feel. Powerlessness. The viewport flickered again, and the image of Earth disappeared, replaced once more by the empty void. No words. No attack. Just the absence of his fleet and the unshaken silence of the system. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, set a course back to the council. His officers hesitated, uncertain. "That's an order." The Indomitable turned, engines roaring to life as it fled Sol. The cruiser followed. No obstacles stood in their way. No chase. No pursuit. They were being allowed to leave. And that terrified Korath more than anything. As they breached the system's edge, a final transmission flickered onto their screen. One last warning. One last reminder. The seat remains empty. It always will. Do not return. Korath said nothing. He didn't need to. He understood now. The others never had a chance. The council never had a chance. The galaxy had never truly realized what had been lurking just beyond their reach. Not an empire. Not a species. Not a military force. Something else. Something that did not want to rule. Something that did not need conquest. Something that simply was. And it had chosen, long ago, to remain unseen. Earth's seat was empty, because the alternative was unthinkable. The Indomitable streaked through the void, its engines roaring at maximum output. The crew was silent, their faces pale, their hands trembling over their stations. Korath sat rigid in his command chair, his mind replaying every moment in Sol. The disappearing fleet. The whispered warnings. The impossible force that had moved them without effort. The realization that he had not fought, not even been tested. He had merely witnessed. No empire in the history of the galaxy had ever possessed the ability to erase ships from existence without so much as a trace. Not even the most advanced civilizations had wielded power like this. The galaxy thrived on war, on conquests and conflicts, on destruction and rebuilding. That was the law of existence. Strength dictated survival. Yet whatever it had become, it had not destroyed them. It had simply removed them. He had always believed in absolutes, that no matter the enemy, there was always a path to victory, always a weakness, always a way to burn, to crush, to dominate. But now, with the Sol system behind them, with nothing in pursuit, he realized a terrible truth. There was no path against something that did not need to fight. An officer hesitated before speaking. "Commander, should we alert the rest of the fleet? Should we prepare a counteroffensive?" His voice was brittle, grasping for certainty, for the hardened commander they had always followed. Korath turned his head slightly, his expression blank. "And what exactly would we fight?" The officer's mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. None of them did. Another voice cut through the uneasy quiet. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Intergalactic Council. They demand immediate response." Korath exhaled, his fingers tightening over the cold steel of his chair. Of course they demanded answers. The Council had sent him expecting conquest, expecting battle, expecting fear to be eradicated by the might of his armada. Instead, only 2 ships returned from what was supposed to be an effortless demonstration of dominance. The truth would not be welcome. The truth would terrify them. "Patch it through," he commanded, his voice level. The central view screen flickered, revealing Grand Chancellor Vorex, his reptilian features twisted into impatience. The other council members loomed behind him, their faces expectant, eager for confirmation of Earth's insignificance. "Commander Korath," Vorex began, his voice cool, calculated. "Your return is unexpected. We anticipated." His gaze flicked past Korath to the empty space behind him, realization dawning. "Where is the rest of your fleet?" Silence spread across the bridge like a slow-moving plague. The officers lowered their gazes, refusing to meet the Chancellor's eyes. Korath leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the armrest, his face unreadable. "Gone." The word hung in the air. Vorex's expression shifted, confusion creeping into his features. "Gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Gone." Korath's voice remained calm, deliberate. No debris. No wreckage. No trace. His eyes locked onto Vorex, daring him to dismiss the truth. "We were allowed to leave." Murmurs rippled through the council chamber, uneasy, disbelieving. Vorex's expression hardened. "What nonsense is this? You think I lie?" Korath's voice sharpened, a quiet, dangerous growl. "You think I would return to this chamber having failed, that I would fabricate a tale of impossibility rather than claim battle? You sent me into the void to bring you answers. Chancellor, here is your answer. Do not return to Sol." Vorex's eyes narrowed. "You would have us surrender to a phantom threat. You tell me Earth is powerful, yet they do not rule. They do not expand. They do not act. That is not the behavior of a superior force. That is the behavior of a species too weak to claim its place in the stars." Korath laughed. A single, humorless sound. "You think conquest is the only path to power, that because they do not move against us, they are lesser." He leaned forward, his voice dark, carrying the weight of something ancient and unspoken. "You mistake patience for weakness. They do not claim their seat, Chancellor, because they do not need to." Vorex's nostrils flared. "If they are as unstoppable as you claim, why do they hide?" Korath's eyes flashed. "They do not hide. We are beneath notice, and those who sought to change that were erased before they could even understand what they faced." He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You still don't understand, do you? You still think of them as human. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. Vorex's brow furrowed. Explain. Coratha's fingers drummed against his chair, his thoughts calculating. The humans we expected, the ones we read about in ancient archives, no longer exist. Whatever they have become, whatever they are now, they are something else entirely. They have surpassed war, surpassed conquest, surpassed the need for either. His voice was grim, unyielding. And we are nothing but insects crawling at their doorstep. More murmurs. Unease growing. The council had ruled for millennia, commanded armadas that had reduced empires to cinders. Yet here, now, a realization crept upon them like a sickness. Chancellor, Korath continued, his tone quieter, but no less severe, remove Earth's seat from this chamber. Forget its name. Let its silence remain undisturbed. If we do not, we will not be conquered. We will not be defeated. His jaw clenched. We will simply cease. Vorex stared at him for a long moment, and in his eyes, Korath saw it. Fear. True, unshakable fear. The screen cut off. The chamber behind him was still. No one spoke. No one moved. Korath exhaled, slow and deliberate. Earth's seat was empty. It would remain so. The silence in the council chamber was suffocating, the weight of Koratha's words settling into the bones of those who had gathered. No one dared to speak. The council, once a body of absolute authority, now sat in quiet horror. The warlords, the diplomats, the rulers of entire sectors, all of them stared at the empty space where Earth's seat remained, untouched and eternal. Koratha's hands curled into fists at his sides. He could see it in their eyes. They still didn't understand. They didn't want to. Their minds clung desperately to the illusion of control, to the belief that no power in the universe was beyond their ability to challenge. But Sol had proven otherwise. Vorex's expression was unreadable, his serpentine features drawn tight with barely contained disbelief. "This is unacceptable," he finally said, his voice cold, authoritative, as if sheer command could rewrite the truth. "An entire armada does not simply disappear." His gaze burned into Korath, seeking defiance, seeking weakness. "You expect us to believe that a species that has done nothing for 1,000 years has somehow developed the power to unmake fleets, that they have evolved into something beyond our comprehension while we have dominated the stars." His nostrils flared. If such a force existed, if they had the ability to erase threats without battle, then why have they not claimed dominion? Why have they not expanded? Why have they not taken what should be theirs? Koratha's laughter was quiet, bitter. "Because we are not a threat to them. We never were." His voice dropped, measured, deliberate. "We mistake our conquests for dominance. We assume war is the only measure of strength. We believe the desire to rule is universal." He let his gaze sweep the chamber, daring them to meet his eyes. "But what if it isn't? What if they look at us and see nothing but—" He gestured vaguely. "Children squabbling over sandcastles. What if the only reason we still exist is because they simply do not care?" Vorex's hands curled into his robes. "Absurd. Every power in history has sought expansion. Every species desires more." His voice grew sharp. "What species evolves beyond the fundamental need to conquer?" Koratha's fingers tapped against the armrest of his chair. "A species that has seen what conquest leads to. A species that has learned there is no enemy left worth fighting." He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "A species that has already won." The room darkened with the weight of those words. He could see the struggle in their expressions. They wanted to reject it, to dismiss him, to say he had failed and let fear twist his mind. But they couldn't, not entirely, because the warlord they had sent into Sol, the conqueror they had trusted to crush whatever mystery Earth held, had returned not with victory, but with knowledge. And knowledge was the most terrifying weapon of all. Vorex exhaled sharply, composing himself. "If they are so powerful, why do they remain hidden?" His voice softened, but the edge remained. Why do they not reveal themselves? Koratha's gaze flicked to Earth's empty seat, then back to Vorex. Would you? He let the question settle, let the implications root themselves deep. If you held power beyond comprehension, if war was beneath you, if nothing in the galaxy could challenge you, he smiled grimly. Would you waste your time explaining that to ants? Vorex stiffened. The council stirred uneasily. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were pressing inward. Finally, one of the elder diplomats, a wizened being with centuries of experience, cleared his throat. His voice was brittle. If what you say is true, what do we do? Koratha's reply was immediate. Nothing. His tone was final, absolute. We do nothing. We forget. We move on. He exhaled. We remove Earth's seat from this chamber. We erase their records. We do not speak of this again. And above all else, we do not return. Not for war. Not for diplomacy. Not for anything. Vorex's lips curled in distaste. You would have us cower. I would have us survive. Koratha's voice was iron. There is no cowering from something that does not see you as a threat. There is only restraint. Only silence. We leave them alone. His jaw clenched. And we pray they continue to leave us alone. The chamber was silent. The weight of the decision loomed. To wipe Earth from their records would be an admission of fear, of powerlessness. But to acknowledge Earth as it was, to recognize the unspoken truth that humanity had ascended beyond them all, was even more terrifying. Finally, after a long, suffocating pause, Vorex exhaled. We will deliberate. His voice was tight, controlled. This meeting is adjourned. The chamber emptied slowly, murmurs of unease trailing into the corridors beyond. Korath remained seated, unmoving, his eyes lingering on the empty space where Earth's nameplate still stood. It would be gone by morning. He did not stay to watch. He rose, his crimson cape whispering against the cold floor, and walked away. Earth's seat was empty, and it always would be.